It's unfortunate that when we hear about Jason Kidd nowadays, it's all about his coaching career. Like when he coached the Bucks and got a lot of criticism from the fans for his lackluster game plan of chucking long twos. Or the time he told a player to hit him, so he could spill his soda and get a free timeout. Genius. His basketball IQ on full display here. At least he redeemed himself in Dallas. But back in the day, he was legitimately the best point guard in the league for so many years and one of the most impactful players of all time. And he did it all without scoring much. I don't think he gets enough credit for how much he carried mediocre teams deep into the playoffs. How's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today let's take a detailed look at Jason Kidd's NBA career and evaluate how good he actually was. Where does he rank among the greatest point guards of all time? And how would he fare in the league today? Would he be better or worse? Jason Kidd got drafted in 1994 as the second pick. Quickly rising up the ranks, Kidd won Co-Rookie of the Year alongside Grant Hill, and then by his second year, he got selected as an All-Star. However, the early part of his career in Dallas was marred by conflict and controversy. The Mavericks had a potentially lethal big three of Kidd, Jim Jackson, and Jamal Mashburn, a trio that was deemed as the future of the NBA. But they didn't get along off the court, even getting involved in a love triangle with singer Toni Braxton. It affected their chemistry on the court as well, coupled with his coach Jim Clemens putting him on a leash, which made him furious. Eventually, it led to his departure. A few years later, after Kidd got married, he pled guilty to domestic abuse charges and had to take anger management classes. It was quite the rough start for Kidd, and despite his excellence, he wasn't the most level-headed guy. However, it was in Phoenix and later in New Jersey where Kidd made his mark on the NBA landscape. When addressing his trade to Phoenix, Kidd recalled that he tried too hard to play within Clemens' game plan, which didn't fit in with his playstyle. I thought I was trying to do my best and do things the way he wanted to do it. I was trying to execute the style of play he wanted. After the trade, he welcomed the Suns' style of play. Coach Danny Ainge likes to get up and down, and they have a lot of basketball talent there. The Suns' offense consisted of a fast-paced run-and-gun style which really enhanced Kidd's abilities. This is where he made his mark as an elite point guard. In 4.5 seasons there, he averaged nearly 15, 7, and 10. We haven't seen those numbers from a point guard in a long time. I mean, he was a decent-sized point guard, but he wasn't the size of Magic Johnson or anything like that. To lead the league in triple-doubles as a normal-sized point guard is impressive, although nowadays we've become numb to it, especially with Westbrook doing it all the time. His playstyle in Phoenix can be described as hectic and flashy. This was him at his peak athleticism and speed, but he had all the finesse and flair. In this period, he was more familiar with someone like Jason Williams as opposed to Chris Paul. However, his biggest weakness, his shooting, particularly his three-point shooting, was still a thorn on his side. Kidd did make some improvements, but it was still not a reliable option for him. In fact, over 40% of his shots came from mid-range distance, and his efficiency was pitiful. I guess it was common back then, but he really wasn't good at hitting them, making around 35%. On the contrary, Kidd's ability to finish at the rim was spectacular for a point guard. In Phoenix, he hit about 63% of his shots at the rim, a superb percentage for, I guess, not just point guards, but among all players. With all this success, it wasn't until his arrival to New Jersey where everyone started to believe, okay, this guy, he's an MVP caliber player. In the summer of 2001, the Suns and Nets straight up swapped all-star point guards. The younger, eccentric, perhaps even more exciting Stephon Marbury for the older Jason Kidd. At first, we weren't too sure about this. While Kidd was more experienced and the better all-around player, Marbury was a much better scorer. But for the Nets, they needed somebody like Kidd, a veteran leader and presence who doesn't need to shoot that much, and prefers to make his entire team better. Something that Marbury could not do. At this point, Kidd wasn't the speedy, athletic guy he was back in Phoenix. The Nets' offense was more balanced, not just running and gunning, but their half-court offense improved a lot with Kidd at the helm. In the previous year, the Nets won just 26 games, no consideration at all for being a playoff team, let alone a finals team. In a single offseason, Kidd changed everything. They won 52 games, reaching the finals for the first time since the 1970s, when Dr. J was on the team. The biggest change was defense. The Nets went from a bottom-tier defensive team, 24th in the league, to 1st. Kidd was a huge boost to the team's perimeter defense, but it wasn't just that. It was his leadership, his communication, and guidance that encouraged his teammates to follow his lead. What's funny is that the Nets originally wanted Kidd as a guy to complement Kerry Kittles and Keith Van Horn. They were supposed to be the primary guys on the team. Kidd was supposed to be a piece to build around them, but instead, he became the de facto leader and star. The crazy thing is, if you look at the roster, there's no way they should be a contender, yet here they are. Granted, the Eastern Conference was probably the weakest it's ever been, but they still made it through. That shouldn't discredit how shocking this turnaround was. Kidd recalled all the doubters upon his arrival to New Jersey. This is how he described it. "The big thing is we had a great season, you know? Nobody had picked us to be in this position. So for us to get this far with the talent that we had and the group of guys, that just shows the character in the group of guys we had. We're not going to be satisfied. We've got to use this as our first step of becoming one of those elite teams. Sometimes it's gonna hurt, but success has never come easy." Sadly, the Nets would get utterly demolished in the finals. Nobody was touching the Lakers that year. The Nets would reach the finals again a year later, back-to-back, and this time they put up a better fight against the Spurs, but still fell short. Kidd single-handedly turned the Nets from a bumbling franchise to a formidable contender. During that era, the most interesting point guard comparison was between Kidd and his rival, Steve Nash. Both players were known for turning around their respective teams. While Kidd did not have the sheer shooting capacity of Steve Nash, he was a far better defender, finishing his career with a total of 9 All-Defensive nominations, 4 of them first-team All-Defense. Kidd also led the league in triple-doubles for 11 different seasons, including 5 consecutive years on the Nets. His intelligence and basketball IQ were leagues ahead of any other point guard of that time. Sadly, Kidd would not reach the finals again with the Nets. Even after the acquisition of Vince Carter, the rest of the Eastern Conference quickly caught up. The emergence of LeBron and D. Wade and the rise of the Pistons and Celtics, the Nets simply fell behind. It didn't help that Kidd got injured in 2004. A microfracture knee surgery forced him to play more slowly and methodically, a huge hindrance to his already fading athleticism. While his career up until now has been super impressive, perhaps the most impressive part was his longevity and adaptability. Remember how he always got clowned for his piss-poor shooting? Well, by the time he arrived in Dallas, his three-point shot became a legitimate threat. He even had some seasons shooting over 40% from 3. It was so unexpected, but it shows how hard he worked to mitigate his weaknesses. Probably his only weakness, to be honest. As he got older, he also got a lot wiser. The Kidd we saw in his second stint in Dallas was nothing like his first stint. He was way more mature, way more controlled, and it was obvious he wasn't a star anymore. The Mavs were Dirk's team, and he knew that. Despite all the fame and success, Kidd was missing one thing: a championship. The trophy eluded him. That all changed in 2011, a team filled with older, once prominent stars out of their primes trying to desperately make one last run to the title. It was an utter shock that they swept the Lakers, the defending champs. Even more shocking when they defeated the star-studded Miami Heat. In a season where everyone's eyes were on them, it was the Mavs who got the last laugh. Kidd's career continued for a few years after that, and after 19 seasons, he retired. So, how good was he actually? Certainly a top 10 point guard of all time, arguably a top 5 point guard ever. Although it's a position where he's competing with a lot of legends too. The all-time point guard list can go in a bunch of different ways. However, I feel like he doesn't get enough credit anymore. In an era where people are impressed by gaudy scoring numbers, Kidd wasn't a guy who took over games by scoring. He elevated his entire team. As the NBA moved towards a more perimeter-oriented game, it's almost mandatory for point guards nowadays to know how to shoot. That's why I don't think Kidd would be as good in this era, compared to the early 2000s. Then again, if Kidd did play in this era, he'd be working even harder on his jump shot. So for all we know, he could have been just as good. I'll leave you with my favorite quote from him. "No matter what percentage, no matter what my numbers say in the sense of points, assists, rebounds, and steals, it's always been about winning. And it will always be about winning, making my teammates better." This mentality is what got him so far, a way of basketball he followed ever since he was a kid. Anyway, that's all folks. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on Jason Kidd. Where would you rank him all time? Thank you all so much for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.